Um,
Yeah, and so I want to kind of back up and say how I met you. So I
yeah,
was lucky enough to be asked to read your book when it first came
yeah,
out. I have it right
that's
here.
right.
Anyone who hasn't read this, I really think it is a must because it's so great for so many reasons. One, it just makes you go, oh my God, someone else is going through this. Right? Because I think often we just feel so alone in
Yeah.
this. And also because you are a psychologist, what is so great is you kind of come at it from both sides. So you have so much experience seeing hundreds of ADHD kids, I'm sure other all, letters and labels. But then also your experience with your own son. So
Yeah.
that's why I think it's really, really great because it kind of gives you both the mom view and then, the other side too,
Thank
which
you.
is why I think you are such a great person to ask about neuropsychological testing.
Yeah.
Because what I'm seeing lately, and you can kind of echo this, is that I'm seeing a lot of my students actually, and just others who I know, getting an ADHD diagnosis after a 15-minute
Oh,
visit, to the doctor, and without anything else, right?
yeah.
And I just think, which is not how it happened for us, luckily, which I just thought the way it happened for us was the way it happened for anyone. So our therapist, who we were seeing at the time, so when my oldest was in 3rd grade, she suggested, hey, why don't you just do this? I think it'll just be good to see what shows up. At the very least, it'll help us understand your son more. And so I said, sure. Except that I went in it so blind. I knew
Oh,
nothing about it at all. And so I went, I brought him to this office. He was there for the whole day. I brought snacks, and I didn't even know what was going on kind of in the back
yeah.
room. I had no idea.
Yeah.
And he said, well, Mom, they kind of asked me to like say the alphabet backwards. And, they showed me a lot of shapes on a screen. And then afterwards, I didn't even see the results. No one ever sat down with me and talked it over with me. They just sent us to a psychiatrist who said, here's some meds
I
you can
remember
take.
you told me that.
Yeah, your son has ADHD, and here's some meds you can take.
Wow.
Now, we got a copy of it, so I kind of read over it, but it's really hard to understand everything
Yeah.
that's in it. So let's, just kind of back up, because then we got retested 3 years later, completely different experience.
Yeah.
Wonderful experience. Talked us the whole way through, sat down afterwards for an hour for each kid, told us all these different things we could be doing, talked about their strengths,
Yeah.
things we could be doing in school, things we could be doing at home. It was just so two completely different experiences. And so I think that if people can go into their first one knowing this, they will have a much better experience. And I think even with your viewpoint, you can even say more. So
Yeah.
what what is a neuropsych? And I'm sure there's many different words for it also.
The way I describe it to families is it's an in-depth evaluation to look at how your child learns, meaning cognitively how they process information. So how do they process language? So information with words. How do they process visually based things like looking at patterns and sequences? How do they how do they understand academics? So sometimes I'll see an assessment that looks really nicely at memory and motor skill development and vocabulary, and then they skip the academic part completely. So I'm looking, but then I don't get to see anything about how that child is doing in the academic areas, which I tell the parent, that's so confusing, I don't understand that part. And the parent will say, well, I told them that reading, writing, and math was on track. And I just say, even if parents tell me that, I want to look in depth at the reading. I want to see sight words, phonetics, children sounding out blended letter sounds like heb, mib, things they've never seen before. I want to look at how they're doing. And many times a child will be average in their reading, but they're the child who's resisting reading and they're saying, I don't want to do it. And they're having big fights with their parent. And the parent's like, you know what? They are coming out like 42nd percentile in their reading. And then I'll evaluate them and it's like, well, their verbal skills are in the 97th and their phonetic decoding is in the 28th.
Mm.
So this child is working really hard to get through reading, and they don't have the language to say, I am struggling in reading. And so anyway, I always assess the academics, because for example, with math, many times kids with ADHD, the rote memorization of math facts is really hard.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, in fact, that was
I
one
want
of
to
our first red flags, really for my son. He could not memorize
the rote
math facts.
memorization.
He had such a hard
He
time.
couldn't do his math facts. I'm looking here and well, I think that my phone right now, I'm going to grab my phone because I think I should get on my hotspot, since I think you're cutting out a little. Here
Okay.
it is. Let me just do this so that, because it seems like a lot of times when I switch to my phone Wi-Fi, for whatever reason, it cuts out less. You there?
Yep.
Okay, let's see how this goes. Hopefully okay.
Okay.
So right, the rote memorization tends to be hard. So a neuropsych eval will look at all aspects, lots of aspects of memory, like rote memory, which tends to be hard for kids with ADHD, and then more contextual memory, like stories. And you can know by looking at and knowing about the research around ADHD that certain tasks, right, like the fine and visual motor skills tend to come later, because we know that the cerebellum is impacted with ADHD. One of the things that I've been doing this week is listening to John Rady from the CHAD conference and some of the other presenters who spoke at the Children and Adults with Attention Deficit Disorder conference. And I spoke there too. And so I paid all this money. Even though I'm a presenter, I still pay the same amount. And so I've been trying to watch the talks before I no longer have access.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm learning there's a lot of stuff about the brain that we're learning even more about with the cerebellum, and lots about exercise and all kinds of really interesting things. I'm going off on a tangent here. But in terms of neuropsych testing, it's such a nice way to get a snapshot of how your child is processing information. And the psych part is important, not the cognitive and the learning alone, but that mental health part, because we know that children with ADHD are often experiencing more stress, and chronic stress leads to all kinds of things like lower confidence. And there's a lot of anxiety overlap. And I think you and I, Beth, we've talked about that.
Yeah.
The anxiety piece and how much of an overlap that is, and how the anxiety that kids experience with ADHD is often one of the things that's triggering more behavioral difficulties.
Mm-hmm. For sure. So how does somebody go about finding someone who can actually test their kids?
Yeah. So often, what I I'm having so many people reach out to me right now because I changed practices, and they're telling, and I'm now working on my own. And so people are finding me again through ADHD and you, and asking me how is it even happening. Some clinicians are working in their offices, and many are doing virtual testing. And it is, you can contact your insurance company to ask about who within their insurance plan is someone who does pediatric neuropsychological testing. And what I will say is you'll often get a big range of clinicians. So
Anything
I,
to look for, like anything that you would say, oh gosh, that would be a red flag for me.
a 1 or 2 hour evaluation would definitely be a red flag because it takes half a day to get the testing done. So anyone who says, I will work with your child from 9 to 11 and then I'll send you a report. First of all, they should always have a feedback session that they speak with you about. And that's typically a therapy hour. So it's like a 50-minute session. They should call you back if you call and have questions,
Mm-hmm.
and answer the questions and be not put out at all by that. I mean, it's a big investment to have your child evaluated. So that person should have a way of getting. So for me, what I'm doing right now, since everything's online, is I'm sending families the release and all kinds of the documentation that tells them what the testing is, what they should expect on the day of testing. They should ask you for records. The evaluator should be saying, does your child have any added educational support services in school, like a 504 or IEP? If so, I want to review that. They may be, I mean, before when people came to my office, it was in my paperwork to have people bring that stuff. So maybe they may not say that. It's not a terrible red flag if they don't mention it until the appointment, because sometimes people at the appointment say, okay, now this is what I need from you. But within the testing process, they should want to look at any previous evaluations, and they should want to connect with the child's teacher or teachers. Lately, I've been doing Zoom calls with teachers, like 15 minutes, and just saying, can you talk between 8 and 8:15, and gathering. And that's hard for the teacher and for me, but I'm willing to do it because it makes such a difference in finding out quickly what we can problem solve about really fast. And
Yeah,
that's
that's amazing.
that's often
That's
at the
yeah,
end of testing, isn't that?
that's yeah. No, that's amazing too because I just usually fill out those forms that say like always, never, sometimes,
Oh,
and it's so hard because it never really fits any of those, and so
yeah.
that's great just to get feedback like that.
Right.
Should
So so I'm doing like an electronic release so that then I just say, tell me the child's strengths. I want to know, like in sentences, the teacher can say lots of stuff, and then tell me what's hard. And then we just quickly talk. And instead of going back and forth with all of those paperwork faxes that teachers are typically having to do in order to talk to a family. So
Yeah, and so like what do you really want parents to say to you first off? I mean, what sorts of things should they be mentioning? Struggles at home, struggles at school, good things.
I talk families through an interview process that I've done so many years that it's really helpful for me, because then I can compare responses over the years. I mean, I always start out with what's going well for your child. Tell me about that, and tell me what is natural strength. I call them areas of brilliance. That's what I do. But
Mhm.
what are your child's areas of brilliance? And we talk about the early developmental history. Of course, that's important when they reached milestones, any head trauma, all kinds of information, tics. I want to know about all kinds of neurological things, friendships. Um, I want to know about behaviors where a child has had trouble with all kinds of things that may be embarrassing for the family to talk about, such as toileting issues, stealing, you name it. I just want to know in a very non-judgmental way what your experience has been and what's going on. I want to know anything about the extent, the marriage that may be impacting the child's mental health. Parents will come in often guarded, and by the time they finish that session with me, they've told me that their spouse has been in jail for 15 years. I mean, I find out all kinds of things because they need to know that it's safe.
Mm-hmm.
And that my desire is nothing to do with reporting anything. And I often say to parents, they're afraid about telling me about drug use history and all kinds of things. And so I have to do a lot of reassuring families that if there's nothing going on at this point, I have no, anyway, that's a whole process.
Mm-hmm.
But I try to really make people feel safe, because the main thing is I need to know about that child's history so that I know what specialists to recommend and what to fully assess for,
Mm-hmm.
all of it.
And so then it's often a wait, right? I mean, to get to see you or someone. Like, we had to wait. We got in fairly quickly. It was about 6 weeks, but I know sometimes, people say, "Oh my gosh, it's 4 months out." Do
That
you?
that was my waiting list. When I worked at a place called Fraser Child and Family Center, my waiting list, I kid you not, was almost a year.
Oh my
And
gosh.
then I began working at another clinic, and my waiting list was usually 4 to 6 months. And now that I'm on my own, at first I started out, to be honest, it's so much work, the testing, that I was like, you know what, I'm going to focus on my next book and I'm really not going to do much neuropsych testing. But the really weird part is that I've missed it a little bit.
Yeah.
So I think it's definitely spoken to the fact that I was overworked for sure for a long time. But working with kids and watching how they're so earnest when they tell me about their learning and what's hard and what's easy, and I make sure parents offer some sort of a benefit for doing the testing. I explain that it's a lot of work. We get paid to go to the office or to do our jobs. I think it makes sense to promise some kind of a special dinner or a little toy or something, because it is really grueling going through. It's nerve-wracking and it's also a lot of work.
Yeah.
So,
So on the actual day,
yeah,
what can we expect?
you can expect that the parent will come in, and they should have, every clinician is different, but I don't have the child present during the parent interview. I want the parent to be able to speak freely. And I ask parents to bring someone to be with the child during the initial hour, or have the child arrive an hour later, but don't have and many times a parent doesn't have that luxury. So the child played with my dollhouse in the hallway outside of my office, or and I would just alternate toys out there so they could entertain
Mm-hmm.
themselves. Then the child comes in and you work together for a few hours. During that time, I am doing all kinds of things to keep them engaged. I'm like doing a downward dog at one point with the child. We're balancing, we're playing catch, then we're doing math, then we're standing, then we're jumping for a minute, then we're writing a paragraph. So there's
Great.
all kinds of physical activity going on. There's a lot of popcorn eating. I always make sure to find out, is there a food allergy? But many kids are eating like my fruit, my snacks, if there's no food allergies, because the main thing is to get them through. And for kids with ADHD, movement, even through snacking, if it's healthy snacking, it really, really helps get through the tasks. You don't want to do that regularly, but during testing, I, many kids will go through their lunch during the
Yeah.
evaluation.
No, I remember bringing, tons of snacks, bars and nut mixes and things like that, and them just eating a ton of it. It was
Yeah.
probably 3 to 4 hours, I would say.
Yeah. You'll expect 3 to 4 hours. And then often that child will have a little bit more. Sometimes we can't get it done the first day, all of it. And that child may have like a real experience where they just start telling me, I'm not going to do anything. And I, in the beginning of my career, pushed quite a bit more than I do now. A lot of things I feel like once I have a real sense of this student and enough about the writing, enough about this or that, I've known enough and seen enough that I don't need to push as hard. You know what? I used to be, you're more rigid a bit in your career. For me, I was early on because I doubted myself a bit less. So I had to really learn, like, this child does not even need to come back, or no, they do. And it's a call. You never are quite sure. The kids that come from like another state, they drive, they come stay at a hotel the night before. I do everything I possibly can to get them completely done, of
Yeah.
course. And I do a ton of rewarding. There's lots and lots of, you did such an amazing job and I'm so proud of you. And sometimes I'm having to say, let's go get mom or dad or both of your moms or both of your dads. Let's go get your people so they can help you. They can help us. And it's just a completely creative process and it's very intense. And there is something wonderful about being with a family in those moments. What I would say about the feedback sessions, what's important, and I often recommend, is that families have two. So one for them, the parents, and one for them to bring the child with the parents. Because
That's good. Yeah, that's good. I like that. I
I
think
like to be
ours,
able,
both of the times were with the kids. And yeah, I can see where you wouldn't want that.
well, it depends. If families, like, if sometimes a child is too anxious knowing that they're, a child, I'm going to tell my children because they are squeaking dog toys. Guys, I can hear that. No. Okay.
Oh my gosh.
Um,
That's funny.
so some kids I'll say to the child, if it's like a 10-year-old, all right, I'm going to meet with your parents next. If the child's really anxious, like on a different day, and often insurance won't pay for testing and the feedback the same day, which is fine because I think, I need to score everything and I need to process all the information. So sometimes a child will say, they'll look so worried to me that I just know I need to include them in the feedback that first time, that they're going to be the child that's like staying up late worrying about it. Even though I will tell them the gist, sometimes I'll say, you seem really worried. You know what? Reading is harder. That's what I'm going to be talking to your parents about. And I'll just let them know. Sometimes kids are like, I don't want to be, I don't want to ever see that lady again. Like, that was really stressful. She was nice to me, but I don't ever want to go there again. They don't want to do it.
Yeah.
Some parents and their kids have so much tension that when I'm saying even the nicest thing about the teenager and the parent may ask a question or show emotion, the teenager's furious and it's just a complete disaster. So I just have the
Yeah.
parents come in so the parents can ask questions. And that teenager may be so fragile that they feel offended by any slight weakness I mention. And it's too painful. But then when they come in with their parents and the parents already know everything from a previous session, I just talk with them directly and I say, your parents are here just to be present, but I'm really just talking to you today. And then I just go through everything and I say, you don't have to agree. I am recommending counseling. I know that you mentioned you don't want to do that, but this is why. And then I just go through the process.
And so in that session too, you will then say, here's some things you can try. Here's
Yeah.
some things you can ask for at school, right? Here's some things you can try at home. So you
Yes.
kind of, just give them as many ideas,
But
right, as
yeah.
possible.
And I check in because sometimes kids look so glazed over. They're so overwhelmed. They'll say, What? What do you mean I have ADHD? Like, this weird person at my school has ADHD. There's no way I am not like her or something. And so then I'll try to move on to talk about something else like math tutoring. And then I see the teenagers shutting down. And so basically, that's all I can say. The rest is going to be in writing that I'm sending to your family. Or the main thing may be that I'm worried about that teenager's mood. So even though they have ADHD, the main thing I might focus on might be depression. It really depends on where that teenager is. And hopefully we've developed enough rapport during testing that, and they will tell me, I'll say before the feedback, is there anything you're really worried about me talking about with your parents? And they'll say, I don't want you to tell them about me cutting. And I'll say, well, I have to talk about that part. So then there's kind of a lot of negotiation that goes on before that session even.
Those teenagers. And I know
Yeah,
they have
so
to. It's such a sensitive time, isn't it?
it is. And I would have been kind of a bad teenager if I had to be tested. I probably would have been the one that refused to talk during it or something. I would have been just thinking, they think I'm not smart. Why do I have to do this? And then and so it's a really sensitive assessment. So I think your person that you like, I always pass on, word of mouth is such a great way to get out information if you can. Like if somebody, that's why people will say, I heard about you from this person and this person and this person, and I'm willing to wait or whatever. And so if you hear that somebody's great, like you have a good person, Beth, so you'll probably take your kids back to that person for updates if you need to before they go to college or something, right?
Yeah, we did it 3 years, and I would even say, that I would do it sooner. Again,
yeah, I keep forgetting your kids are younger. I keep thinking they're like a few years younger than mine, but they're not.
Well, they're 12 and 14.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
But just even in that 3-year span, some different stuff kind of showed up. So, and it's what I loved was that it said so many great things.
Yeah.
And so then, I could then say, here, school, here, teachers, look at all these great things. And then, these other things too. But it just really gives school such a great roadmap.
Yeah.
Because ADHD can mean 10 million different things. Like that alone to me says nothing. Because my 2 kids have that label and they could not be more different in the way it shows up.
Yeah.
So I just think that getting as much information as you can for yourself, for the school, is just so wonderful, which is why I just advocate this for everybody, because so many people are not getting it.
They are not. Well, what's so neat about you as a teacher is that, you, because of your sons, now when you see children with learning differences, you are the teacher who wants to understand those evaluations and who wants to look at not the full scale, but okay, what is the processing speed and what is the working memory and how does that show up? And that's one of the trainings that Prairie Care Hospital here, I'm going to be doing that training for their professionals in January or February, where I go over NeuroPsyche testing and how to transition, how to interpret those results as a therapist to use them in the clinical setting. So, and what, I was walking with my son William today, and he's 21 and doing college from home at this point because of the pandemic. And I had just finished that John Rady talk all about exercise. And he's the psychiatrist who's done really a massive amount of research about the benefits of exercise for all kids, but kids with ADHD and how it activates the frontal lobe quite a bit. And so I said, Will, wouldn't it be neat if teachers all did no timeouts and instead had kids run around the building or jump on a trampoline and he was like, yeah, my math teachers, he said, the teachers that did that had me he's like, Miss Kira, she had me always run around the school during math. She, instead of separating me from other kids, she'd just say, Will, go run 2 laps. And he said, I said, why do you think she knew that? And he said, Mom, she has a kid who's definitely not neurotypical. So I think that the teachers who do, he was so grateful to all the teachers who just let him move instead of trying to make him stand somewhere.
Yeah, it does nothing. I mean, it just makes it worse, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I've learned too. I mean, recess, I never hold a kid in from recess. Never.
Never, never.
'Cause that's
I'm sure
exactly what
people,
they need. Yeah.
yeah,
So
yeah.
now where can people find you?
So my foundation that I have founded is called ADHD and You. So they go to, if they look up Catherine Quee, they'll probably, it'll just bounce up, my home KQ ADHD. And so the AND and then the letter U. So they just look up my name and then they go to my website. And then there's a work with me page where people can go and look at the services. I actually don't have NeuroPsych on there right now, but families can contact me. And there's a 15-minute free consult that families can sign up for. And then, depending on what's going on with them, I'll just decide if I'm a good fit or not for that testing. I'm doing a few a month and I like it. It keeps me in the game, and it's sometimes it's easier being a diagnostician than the one who's really helping kids after the fact. So I like to keep a balance.
I hear you. Well, I
Yeah.
will have all the links um, underneath this too,
Yeah.
so people can go see that. So
That's
thank you so
great.
much. It was so good to talk to you again.
You too. Let's stay in touch.
All
Bye.
right.
Bye.